Can you confirm this?
Yes, I can see the slides. Thanks, Jean. And I just can't hear you properly. You're breaking up. Can everyone hear me? If you can just let me know if the a thumbs up or whatever, you can hear me clearly. And then I can just let Jean know when we need to change the slides. Oh, great. So it seems like everybody can hear. Good morning, everybody, again. As I said, unfortunately...
you got phone there?
Yeah, I can see them and I can hear you slightly.
Let's start the recording.
Okay. All right, guys, let's start. Good morning, everyone. As I said, unfortunately, Prof. Max is not able to be with us this morning, so he sent me his slides and I'm going to take you through them and explain to you the kind of thing that he wanted to say in the last session. So I was listening to the end of Dion's session, and it seems like he was talking a little bit about the education system, that's very good because that kind of like links with what he wanted to say. So his session this morning was going to be on engaging the education system. So that was in relation to particularly with the aspect of support and what are the strategic initiatives that are happening within the education system in the last couple of years as regards support of learners who are in need of help or intervention due to various different learning barriers. Thanks, Jean. You can change to the next slide. Jean, you can change to the next slide. Thank you. So then here he's put the inclusive education policies. So the inclusive education policies, these are the ones that pertain particularly to support of learners who have barriers or who are vulnerable or who are at risk, who are definitely need support from the education system. So obviously the first one is Education White Paper 6. So that is the one about guidelines for inclusivity in schools. So unfortunately, there are some schools and people that believe that Education White Paper 6 came and went. Unfortunately, it's very much, or fortunately, it's very much in force. It's still the policy, the guiding policy. And on page 9, I think, of that document, it actually explains about support. So it says things like, it acknowledges that all children can learn and need support, that it will enable the education systems, the curriculum, the teaching methods to meet the needs of all learners. And then it acknowledges and respects differences in learners regardless of the gender, ethnicity, language, class, disability, or infectious disease. And it goes on to say things like to change attitudes of people, their behaviors, their teaching methods, the curriculum and the environment to meet the needs of all learners, and then to maximize the participation of all learners within the education system. And then obviously to uncover and minimize barriers to learning. So that's quite a lot that the education department has envisaged for support for learners that are definitely in need of support. And in order to try and get a good support system and intervention system in place to include everybody and to make sure that everybody belongs and can achieve some part of education for their lives, there are addendums to Education White Paper 6. So if you looked at the end of it, it would say there would be more documents coming out to show how this support and inclusivity could happen in schools. And these are some of the documents that have come out. Some of them have been revised a little bit, but they basically say the same thing. So it kind of, there's a document that came out, it's actually a booklet that came out, guidelines for district-based support teams, explaining how district-based support teams should work, how they should be composed, what the roles of the different people are. That was one of them. Then the other one, another one is the guidelines for full service or inclusive schools. where the department set targets for how many full schools there would be in the country, and in particular in different school districts. And many school districts now do have full service schools, and they can be called in some provinces as inclusive schools. So there are guidelines for those and how they will work and how they should operate. And then there was the one called Guidelines for Inclusive Learning Programs. So the guidelines for inclusive learning programs included things such as assessment and different teaching methods and strategies that you could use to support learners. And then there's another one, Guidelines for Inclusive Schools, how to make your school more inclusive. And related to that was a flyer, Making All Schools Inclusive. Then Guidelines for Responding to Learning Diversity Through CAPS. That one in particular talks about adapting the curriculum and using different forms of curriculum differentiation. That one is quite a nice one. It's got some ideas that you can do. It talks about adapting the content. It talks about adapting the teaching methods. And it also talks about adapting assessment for learners who are in need of support. In fact, for all learners, so that you can actually assess a child and find out what they know without any barriers interfering with them being able to say what they know and what they don't know. And then there was guidelines for special schools, and then special schools as resource centers. So the objective and the plan and the vision, if you'd like to put it that way, was that special schools would still exist. However, they would then have a difference in their role, that they would then become resource centers for the schools around them. So if there was a psychologist or an occupational therapist or a speech therapist, or they had resources that a school needed, the vision was that the school could then request help or assistance or some kind of support from the resource center closest to them, and they would be able to help them with that. And then the last thing that he put on this slide was Tutong. So now Tutong is actually part of the DBE website. Many of you might know it. If you need any documents or any information, often it's available on the Tutong website. So you would just Google Tutong, and then it comes up, and there's various sections that you can click on. It's got the curriculum, it's got strategies, it's got certain other documents. And then there's a section which is called Inclusive Education. And if you click on that, you can also find some interesting information on inclusive education that can help you in the schools. And in fact, any of these documents can most probably be downloaded. I know that Education White Paper 6 can be downloaded. Some of these guideline booklets can be downloaded, and in particular, the guidelines for responding to learning diversity through CAPS can definitely be downloaded. Even if you put that title into the Google search bar, the booklet will sometimes come up, and you can download it. Thanks, Jean. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so one of the strategic things that the department came up with was the 3-stream model. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the 3-stream model that was a vision for catering for learners that have difficulty in particular with following the academic pathway once they reach the secondary part of school. So general education and training is usually from grade 1 to grade 9 with the foundation phase, the intermediate phase, and the first phase of secondary. And then when you went into the further education and training, which is grade 10 to 12, they wanted to put in 3 different learning pathways, because they realized that not every learner is academically inclined, and the majority of our high schools have academic subjects, preparing learners to go to tertiary education in the form of university. And they realized that that's not actually what all our learners need, or necessarily what the world of work in the country needed. So the objective of the 3-stream model was to increase learner access to quality education through expanding curriculum options and to prepare them for the world of work so that when they left school, they would have some skills to be able to be part of an economy where they would be able to build things and be able to support themselves, which we know we have a very high unemployment rate. So this would probably be a very good idea. The other objective of this was to decrease the dropout rates and to decrease the failures and the repetitions. I know we're not supposed to use the word failure, but unfortunately, a lot of our learners are ending up repeating grades. And once you know the rule, once you've repeated a grade there and you're still not making it, you get progressed. And you get progressed to the next grade, progressed to the next grade until you get to the next phase where you can no longer be progressed. So then you repeat again. And these are the learners that these 3 learning pathways were trying to address, that they would not drop out of school, that their repetition rate could be reduced, and that these learners could receive education according to their potential to make them productive members of the world of work, and they would have some kind of work-based training, either in the form of an apprenticeship or a learnership or actually an internship. So the academic pathway remains the same. So your academic high schools, which is the majority of the high schools at the moment, those prepare you for your higher certificates to a doctorate in the higher education and training field. If you are looking at the technical vocational pathway, with the subjects that you would then be able to do there is they would not be academic subjects per se, but they would be things like, there's a whole range of them. I'm just going to name a few. They would be like agricultural studies, digital technology. I heard Claire talking about the digital technology earlier, electronics, technical drawing, engineering type subjects, those kind of things, which could lead within the technical vocational pathway. It could still lead to a university education, but it would be more specialized, or you could still go on to get a certificate or training, and you would be prepared to, you would have some kind of background to be able to work once you left school or you left high school. And then the technical occupational pathway is one that some people might know as your special schools at the moment. Sometimes it's called the School of Skills. Those subjects would be woodwork, hairdressing, welding, panel beating, needlework, food preparation, that kind of thing. Even hospitality falls in within that. And learners who fall into that technical occupational pathway, depending on what route they take, they can, in some instances, get what is called an endorsed matric. So the endorsed matric would be that they would still do your home language, the FAL, and they do a bit of maths, but they would be given a trade so that once they left school, they could automatically, if they were so inclined, be able to go out and work. And some of the vocational schools actually place some of their students in apprenticeships where they would go straight from school into an apprenticeship where they could further their training. They could then also get more technical certificates. The only difference with the technical occupational pathway, from what I understand, is that you wouldn't be able to go to university with that endorsed matric because you'd only do 5 subjects instead of the 7. So this whole 3-stream model was being piloted in 2017, 2018. I don't know if anyone was at a school where it was being piloted or you knew that it was being piloted in your province. I think, if I remember correctly, there was something like, maybe Jean, 27 schools that were being piloted. However, the implementation of this 3-stream model got sidetracked a little, I think, because of COVID. When COVID happened and schools had to close and schools went on rotation and whatever, the 3-stream model kind of like got a little bit delayed. I'm not exactly sure where the implementation is right now, but I'm sure it's still going to happen in some form. Maybe someone knows more about it than I. Haven't followed that up. Thanks, Jean. We can go to the next slide. So on the next slide, Prof. Max wanted you to understand who the role players and the statutory bodies were.
Sorry, we're not seeing the next slide yet.
Yeah, no, Jean isn't. I'm sorry, I can't change them. Thank you, Jean. Yeah, thanks very much, Jean, for helping out. I'm not able to change or share slides. The IT department didn't manage to fix that up this year. Sorry about that, guys. So the role players and the statutory bodies. So these are, maybe you've heard of them, some of them, but you weren't quite sure who they were and what their actual role was. So the Council of Education Ministers, this is the highest structure or the highest body of the basic education sector. So this consists of the Basic Education Ministry, and then all the MECs of education for the provincial departments, all 9 of them are represented on the Council of Education Ministers. I think the 9 MECs are part of the Council of Education Ministries. So here on this council, they oversee, their main goal is to oversee the delivery of quality education in South Africa. That is their main role. So you'll often see, you might hear the Council of Education Ministers have met and they've decided this, or they've proposed this, or they've made this kind of recommendation. That is who they are. So it's the Basic Ministry of Education, and it's the 9 MECs of education in the provinces. Then we all know about the provincial departments of education. So we know there's 9 provinces in the country, 9 provincial departments of education, and each of those departments of education is headed up with an MEC for education, and the different provinces are broken up into different districts. So it depends on the size of the province and the number of learners in the province as to how many districts you've got. So, for example, in Gauteng, there's 15 districts that we each with their own district manager and with district officials under them overseeing the schools within that district. Then there's the heads of education department committee. There's Umaluzi. We've all heard about Umaluzi, usually round about the matric exams, time where they monitor the standards. So Umaluzi's main job is to monitor the standards for general and further education and training in South Africa. So they cover all the schools in South Africa. So it's not just the government schools, but it's also the independent schools. They cover them all and they check the standards within all of them. The standards of teaching and obviously the standards of assessment, but we only tend to hear about it from them when they verify the matric results, and then they make things like that. But they've just had a major conference a couple of weeks ago, and the topics that they spoke about apparently are available. I think they're available on the Umaluzi website. If you were really interested and you wanted to know what they discussed, you can go and look there. Then there's the National Education Evaluation and Development Unit. So they obviously evaluate and put forward ideas for development. And then the South African Council for Educators. So that's SACE. So strictly speaking, anyone teaching in a school in South Africa or teaching at all, you need to be registered with SACE. It's the professional body for educators. SACE's 2 main things are to register teachers, and there's a code of ethics which all teachers are supposed to abide by. So when you become a member of the South African Council for Educators, obviously you've got to pay a small monthly fee, but you have then agreed to a code of ethics as a professional educator, and you are expected to abide by that code of ethics. So the South African Council for Educators does deal with complaints where teachers have committed misconduct, and they can discipline teachers. And then the other major role is that they are overseeing the continual professional development. So you're supposed to register your professional development points, and there's a whole system of, I'm sure you know about it. the amount of credits you're supposed to have for different, for doing certain professional development courses and things like that. And then, of course, we have the educator unions. So I'm not sure, it depends on the private schools, what happens with them, but if you are teaching in a government school, you know that you are required to be a member of the educator unions, of one of the educator unions in the country. And again, you need to pay a fee to be able to do that. Okay, thanks, Jean. We can go to the next slide. The next slide, we're talking about critical challenges of the South African school system. So Prof. Max wanted you to think very carefully about this. So what are the challenges that you are seeing, critical challenges within the South African school system? So this is not just provincial related, it's countrywide in the Department of Basic Education. So there's been a little bit, well, quite a lot of research done on this. One of the main concerns or the challenges is the declining quality of education, including the issue of underprepared learners resulting from internal promotion practices. So the last part that I heard that you were discussing under scholastic is your learners who don't have a learning disability, but who can't read and write at the required grade level. Those are underprepared learners. So that is one of the challenges of the South African school system. Why is that happening? Why are there so many learners reaching secondary school, reaching grade 6 and grade 7, who actually are not able to read and write or even do maths at grade level, never mind age level, but at grade level? People have put forward various reasons of why this is happening. One of the main reasons that has been found in research, I'm not sure whether anyone agrees with it or have an idea what they think, but is that the pressure on the education system at the moment to achieve high pass rates is what is causing this. So I'm not sure what people think about that, but that is what some research studies have found, that this pressure that we have to have a good high pass rate, particularly in matric, our matric results have got to be high, is leading to this underprepared learners and these internal promotion practices where your child, a learner has just not made it at the end of the year, but never mind, we'll adjust the marks so that that learner can pass, so that the pass rate looks good. And that is actually quite a challenge. And I'm sure that many of you have found that, because then that child goes to the next grade and you're thinking, how on earth did this child get here when he can't actually read, he can't write, and he can't do the basic maths. He hasn't grasped it yet. And that's linked to this next point. So this, I'm sure we all know. The educators at secondary level blame the educators at the preceding levels for producing learners who cannot read or write at the levels they need for tertiary study. So it's not just happening from your secondary level where they blame the primary school teachers, the intermediate phase teachers blame the foundation phase teachers, the foundation phase teachers blame the preschool teachers blame the parents blame each other, if they whatever. So it's a cycle of blame and negativity instead of accountability and what can we do about this? How can we stop this? How can we work together? And how can we make sure that this blame game thing stops and that we can get more learners to the right level, or we can support them so that they can actually begin to meet the level they should be working at. So that's one of the critical challenges. Thanks, Jean. We can go to the next slide. The next slide is the challenges facing learners within our schools. What are the challenges facing the learners? Thanks, Jean. Can we have the next slide, please? I'll
Sorry,
read
Liz,
them
I am
out.
moving it. I think there's just a delay in them coming through on your side.
Yeah, it could be. Okay, so I'll just start talking about it until the slide comes up, because I don't want to waste our time. So those are the critical challenges of the South African school system. So yeah, here we go. The challenges facing the learners. So we know about these. Okay, there's violence in schools. Unfortunately, whenever there's violence in schools, regardless of what it is, it hits the news. So we've all seen news reports within the last couple of weeks. Social media in particular, it's full of it. Videos that are taken within classrooms where you see learners assaulting teachers, where you see learners assaulting each other, where you see, we've read about learners being stabbed and killed. We've learned about, unfortunately, in the last couple of months, there's been people walking into schools and shooting teachers for whatever reason. So violence in schools is actually a very critical thing. A lot of our learners are living with violence. The example that they are seeing is violence, and social media actually has kind of promotes this, because it seems like if you can put up something violent that happened in schools, you're going to get a lot of clicks. It seems to be for clickbaits or whatever. The thing about this is that if you are under 18 and you are posting and reposting violent things, and it's actually against the law. There's a Cyber Crimes Act. So I've had to be involved in running workshops, teaching kids at primary school level about cyberbullying, what apps they should be on and what apps they shouldn't be on, what they should be looking at, what they shouldn't be looking at, and in particular what the Cyber Crimes Act says. And it's a very nice act to go and look up, the Cyber Crimes Act of 2021, of what you can and cannot post on social media. So the children get a bit of a fright about it, but they're not even supposed to share a fight on the school grounds on social media. They can be prosecuted for that. The high dropout rates, we know about the high dropout rates, and the most glaring example, I'm not going to go through them all, but the most glaring example is the number of learners that start in grade 1 compared to the number of learners that actually matriculate. There've been various estimates that it's at least half the children that start in grade 1, by the time that cohort should be in grade 12, the number has dropped to half, or just over half, just over 50%. So the high dropout rate is really a big problem. Another problem is late coming. I think all of us can attest to that. Kids come late to school. There's high absenteeism rates amongst learners, and truancy. Truancy starts in primary school at the moment. There's this trend at the moment where as soon as the learners perceive that the assessments are finished for the term, they don't come back to school. So I was just arguing with a bunch of grade 7s yesterday, because half of them that were supposed to be with me in remedial were absent. And I said, where are these kids? They're at home, they're on holiday already because we finished work. Well, you're not finished work, it's not the end of the year. And this trend seems to happen. So if the older kids are staying at home, the younger children don't go to school either, because why would you take the younger kids to school when the older ones are at home? So this is another problem, and I think it's supposed to be being addressed through legislation at the moment, but it's actually a major problem. Okay, the next slide, it talks about challenges facing teachers. So again, I think many of us have come across these challenges, and we know what it is, the implementation of CAPS. So it'll come up when, yeah, there we go, the implementation of CAPS. Thanks, Jean. Insufficient training of teachers. Teachers aren't exactly sure how to implement CAPS. The training was supposed to be a week, and then with union interference, it became 2 days instead of the week. There were a lot of issues around the training, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that. And so teachers feel that they weren't sufficiently trained. The inadequate department support, I heard about that when Lucy was talking. Unfortunately, it does seem to be the case. It appears as if there's inadequate department support and guidance. I think part of the issue there is that our district officers, and in particular our support units, they're overwhelmed. they're overwhelmed, and there are just so many learners in need of support that they actually can't cope. And we all know that there aren't enough special school placements that these learners can be in, and other people are quite reluctant to place a lot of learners outside of the school system because we are in an inclusive environment. So the goal is to keep as many learners as possible within a mainstream environment, but then the challenge becomes, how do we support them? And that is where we are at the moment. And then the poor results in literacy and numeracy. We all know about the PIRLS results. We know about the TIMS results. PIRLS is the reading and comprehension. We know how bad our grade 4s scored, and in particular against many other countries. And TIMS is the maths. We scored just as badly in the maths as we did in the PIRLS, but PIRLS got the highest social media and news coverage. So unfortunately, although we have a good curriculum, our South African learners are performing well below their academic potential. And again, that's where it's an indication that they're in need of support. The underperformance of some educators, not all educators, but some educators. So many educators it's been reported, a research is done and said that some teachers leave at first break and they don't come back to school, and the learners are left to their own devices. The morale of teachers. Teachers seem to have been maligned in the social media at the moment. People laugh. If you go to, if you were in a social gathering and people are saying, what do you do? And sometimes if you say, I'm a teacher, there's a snide remark. And it's uncalled for, and it's not fair, and you feel like retaliating, but you can't. However, I've heard people say, well, how did you learn to read if teachers are so bad? Because there's very few people that have taught themselves to read. So it's unfortunate that people have a very poor idea of what teachers are. We have all these holidays, we don't do much work. They have no idea of what actually teachers are expected to do. And many of our teachers are very stressed and are overwhelmed by admin work and are actually quite demoralized sometimes because of poor management and poor leadership. And that leads us into the next one, the lack of proper school governance. So in many schools, the school management team are not actually able to manage the school and show good leadership qualities, or the kind of leadership quality that they should be able to be able to help the teachers. Many of them contribute to the problem of teacher morale. And then governing bodies. So there are some very good school governing bodies, but there are others that are not functional. There are schools without governing bodies. There are governing bodies that make or interfere in school management, which is not in domains that they're not supposed to. It's lack of training of school governing bodies. And it's very, very difficult to fix that when you felt completely overwhelmed or undermined by a school governing body or a parent on the governing body who has stood up against you and said you're not doing the right thing. Then the next thing Prof. Max wanted us to discuss on the next slide was the indirect challenges. So indirect challenges, I'll start with them so long, are the lack of community support. So you've learned about that. I know I personally discussed it with you in parental, and I'm sure Dr. Layla has continued to discuss it with you. The lack of community support. Again, parents are reluctant to get involved. The community is reluctant to get involved. Very often, they don't want to come and help at functions. They don't want to be seen to be associated with a particular school for some reason. So community support is an area where we need to work on. Politics in schools, protests, particularly erupts in high schools where youth leagues come in to try and influence high school kids, particularly grade 11 and grade 12. I've actually witnessed that myself, and it's quite scary that this kind of thing happens because politics does not belong in schools. Education belongs in schools. Corruption is another big thing. We've read about corruption in the country. Well, there's corruption within the education system. There's corruption within individual schools where there's mismanagement of particularly money, particularly resources. Money disappears. It's not accounted for. There's theft. There's all sorts of things. So corruption is a big issue. I don't want to go too much into that. And the socio-economic factors we know about. We know about the poverty, the unemployment, the poor circumstances that a lot of our learners are living in, the disparity, the unemployment. So those socio-economics are indirect challenges, and these all impact on the ability of learners to achieve their potential in schools. And because that's impacting on the learner's ability to achieve their potential, it's indirectly is saying we need to find some ways to support this. So what has happened there? So Jen, you can just quickly put the next slide on and then go to the next one. So what happens is that those role players that I talked about in an earlier slide, they do sit and discuss these kind of things. So there is, they have action plans from time to time. So the previous action plan was 2017 to 2025. So that one is coming to an end right now. The new one started in 2019, and it's towards the realization of schooling in 2030. So when we have these action plans, they come up with strategies and recommendations on what should be done. And there has been, we can go to the next slide, Jean, when you're ready. There has been one that is called the Care and Support for Teaching and Learning Programs. So this one has been adopted by the Basic Education Department, the Care and Support for Teaching and Learning. This is a manual. You can actually Google it and you can actually download the manual. It's got some quite interesting points in it. I know that you can't read all of those things, so I will explain it on the next slide. So Jean, you can go to the next slide when you can. This is a document. It is not a policy, it's not a program, and it's not a project. It's actually a conceptual framework that they've put together. I will explain some of those because there you can see the elements, the priority actions areas more clearly. It's the minimum package of priority areas. So what it's actually doing is it's a conceptual framework to create a rights-based, socially inclusive schools which welcomes diversity, and this is the important thing, supports all role players in the education system. So these elements and these priorities are for the care and support of teachers and learners, especially our vulnerable learners. Now we know who our vulnerable learners are. I don't need to tell you who that is. So if we look at some of these areas, so at the top there, if we start in the green one, it's nutritional support. So what have they done with nutritional support? I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some of them because otherwise we're going to run out of time. Under nutritional support, it's the school feeding scheme. There's nutrition education. There's the encouragement of school gardens in schools that can produce vegetables for the children. Unfortunately, the school nutrition program, the feeding scheme, only applies to quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools. So those quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools, they are your non-fee paying schools. Your quintile 4 and 5 schools, they are your fee-paying schools. So if there are children that are not having proper, are not being fed at home, the quintile 4 and 5 schools have to, out of their school fees, make provision for the feeding of children who are not getting adequate food at school. And because of that, they've put strict criteria in place. So some children who might be needing food aren't getting it because they don't meet the criteria. That's just something that I wanted to say. Infrastructure, water and sanitation, it's to provide proper water and sanitation. Well, we know about pit toilets. They're still around, and I believe that the GNU has said that they will eradicate them. Let's see what happens. Let's hope that they can do that. Psychosocial support, where learners and teachers have access to psychologists, psychiatrists, and in particular, there's support for vulnerable learners, and particularly with learners who've experienced trauma. So we tend to only see the psychosocial support happening when there's been a major issue at a school. But it's supposed to happen all the time. But again, the system is overwhelmed. So they can't meet every need, and people have to end up making their own plans, and teachers often are the ones that end up supporting these children, and then you have added stress on you. Co-curricular support, that's provision for sport. So the new Minister of Sport's very keen on the fact that school sport must be increased. So that's a good thing, but it's to do about with sport, the provision of sport, that every child has access to sport. Material support is the fee exemption thing, where there must be an exemption policy in place for in quintile 4 and 5 schools, where learners just cannot pay the school fees, and they can't be refused schooling because they can't afford the school fees, and there isn't a non-fee paying school in their area. Curriculum support, that's supposed to help teachers implement the curriculum. Safety and protection, there's supposed to be a school safety committee where at each school where you've got safety precautions put in with the schools. Bullying comes under that, and also you should have a link to the police station. That was one of the areas that they wanted to add. And the social welfare services, under social welfare services comes abuse, to protect kids from abuse. Under health promotion, the big thing there is the prevention of HIV and TB. So TB is still a big problem in our country. There are the number of people and learners with TB is still very high. So TB is a big thing, and pregnancy comes into that, to prevent pregnancy. The interesting thing with health promotion is that it also covers under these action areas. I'm not going through all the things, but it talks about helping the mental health of both learners and teachers. So it talks about that in the action areas. So again, it's a conceptual program, and it's not necessarily what's happening. Thanks, Jean. You can go to the next slide. And while Jean's putting up the next slide, I'm just going to talk about, so we've got all these issues and we've got all these things. So what is remedial or learning support? Let's go back to that. So support can be defined as all activities. So all those activities, and there's more that I didn't talk about because there's a lot of them, which increase the capacity of a school to respond to diversity. So it can take many different forms. Like I told you, it can be from ramps to feeding schemes. It can be from advising parents to adapting the curriculum to making IEPs. So an IEP is a type of remedial education program. It's not the only one, but it is the type. It is a type, and it is the one that's in the CS document called an ISP. So what is the important feature of that? Remedial education programs is to determine the competencies of the child that need improvement and the learning levels of a program participants at the time of their selection, during and after the intervention. So we know what a remedial teacher is supposed to do. So how does that happen in reality, or how is it supposed to happen in reality with relation to learning support and with the relation to ADE? So down there is the assessment support cycle. So what we have tried to do is teach you, you've been given theory in remedial foundations, and Prof. Max has also given you quite a lot of theory. You've learned about assessment in scholastic assessment. So you assess the child. Then you take those results, and from those results, you are setting outcomes and you're planning support. So setting the outcomes would be, what is the most important thing that these kids that I've just assessed need? Sometimes there are so many areas that need remediation that you can't actually tackle them all at once. You have to prioritize. So you set the outcomes, you plan the support. In planning that support, you're going to include the parents, you're going to include other professionals, and you're going to include the teachers and the learner, and you're going to set up your remedial program. Then you're going to implement your remedial program, and you're going to implement it for a period of time. It should only have an IEP or remedial education program should run for a period of time. And once it's run for a period of time, then you reassess the child. So in reassessing the child, you're not going to conduct that whole deep assessment again. You're not going to send them back to a psychologist, but you're going to assess how effective your support program has been. And then you're going to see, where do I still need to, what is more important, what is the child grasped, what haven't they grasped. So So I just want to remind you what a remedial teacher is. So a remedial teacher is a teacher that is specialized training, which you have all now had, specialized training in the understanding, assessment, and intervention of various learning barriers that affect learners' ability to learn effectively. That is why you've done this course. Dr. Jean has previously called it a niche qualification. So it's not a degree, but it's a niche qualification where you have learned more. You have learned more deeply about a specific how can I say, subject, a topic that you can now go take the information that you've got and you can help and support people. And then we know what remedial teaching does. Any remedial education program is to bridge the gaps in the previous learning by building on the current knowledge, assessing the child, finding out where they are, supporting them in their understanding, helping them to overcome their learning challenges. Sometimes you need to help them compensate for the challenges they've got. Other times you're going to give them assessment accommodations, anything that is within the reality of that child to be able to give them, to boost their skills and give them the confidence to achieve their potential. Thank you, Jean. We can go to the next one. The next one is how should they be implemented and when does remedial efforts start? So remedial programs, they're not bound by the age grade system, but they need to start as early as possible. So as soon as you find a learner that has got difficulties or a learner has been identified as having difficulties, you must look at the remedial program and you must look at where you can best help this child, and it doesn't have to be according to their age or grade. So that is essentially the difference between extra lessons sometimes and remedial intervention. So extra lessons sometimes just continue to help the child learn what they should be learning in their class or in their grade. And not all of them, I'm not picking on all of them, but some of them just repeat or reinforce or try to reteach what the child should be learning at the grade system. Remedial looks at why is that child not being able to understand or grasp that concept. And then you look at where's the gap, let me fill the gap so that child can get to the level that they need to be able to understand what they should be doing in that grade. So it's trying to reduce the learning deficits found in a country's education system. That's what remedial programs are. And I think on the next slide, I've put when is an IEP indicated. I'm not going to go through that right now because that's going to take too long. So Jean, you can skip a couple of slides. Yeah, we can skip the slide. We can go to the next one. You can read through that on the recording. When is an IEP indicated? So it's basically the times that we spoke about. Then what should a remedial education program, it can take different forms. It doesn't have to just be an IEP. What are the design and implementation issues? So what are the key issues for the design and implementation of remedial programs? So you must make sure that the intervention that you have planned is adequate intervention. And when it is, very interestingly, when you have given adequate, so we're not saying excellent, we're saying adequate remedial intervention, research has shown that it can yield fast and significant improvement to the child's ability to cope in the class. That is why it is so important that children get this help. How effective have remedial programs been? Again, research has shown, both international studies in first world countries as well as in developing countries have shown that when there's a proper, well thought out, well implemented, structured remedial education program, the results have been outstanding. Okay, significant improvement has been reported in all of those schools, and importantly, there's been a decline in repetition rates. Okay, so I'm designing the remedial learning for low-performing students. We know who the low-performing students are. Defining the remedial intervention goals based on the learning needs. We've talked about that. You've done the assessment, or you've got a psychological assessment that has shown you where the gaps are. You plan your remedial intervention based on that. This is an important point. You're going to try and provide an alternative to grade repetition and avoid the dropout. So when a remedial program is well targeted and it's implemented with good strategies that have been based on the theory. So Prof. Max has taught you a lot of theory this year. And I think you theoried out that you have got this theory now. You can then judge your remedial intervention against that theory as to whether it will be a good intervention or not. Research has shown that it will do this. It will avoid dropouts, and it allows opportunities for children to catch up, and the repetition rate is dropped, and kids who are learning at school don't drop out. They tend to drop out more if they're not learning. And then your program must have defining indicators of expected outcomes. Thanks, Jean. Then we're just going to go to the last slide, and then if anyone wants to say something, they're welcome. When Dr. Jean and I go and we do learning support in different places, we like to finish off the learning support workshop with a story. And I think it's good to remind us about this, because sometimes this work is hard, it's difficult, and sometimes you don't see the reward. Other people seem to see the reward. So I'm going to read it for you, and then I'm done. An old man was walking on the beach one morning after a storm. In the distance, he could see someone moving like a dancer. As he came closer, he saw that it was a young woman picking up starfish and gently throwing them into the ocean. "Young lady, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean?" "The sun is up and the tide is going out, and if I do not throw them in, they will die," she said. "But, young lady, do you not realize that there are many miles of beach and thousands of starfish? You cannot possibly make a difference." The young woman listened politely, then bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it into the sea. It's made a difference for that one. So very often you work hard at support and you don't know the difference that you've made in a child's life until one day you see the photograph in the newspaper and you think, "Oh, I taught that child. Wow, look at him now." So guys, that is something to think about. I don't know if anyone's got any pressing questions, because we're just on time. I just want to say before we finish, Prof. Max sends his best wishes to all of you, and good luck in your education journey. Never stop learning. There's research carrying on all the time about learning and support. Never stop learning, and he wishes you all the best. That's his message to you. Good luck on your education journey, and he's really sorry that he couldn't be here today. I don't know if anyone's got any pressing comments, anything they'd like to say.
Yes, Dr. Liz, first of all, again, thank you so much for all of your support and all of your colleagues. We had a conversation earlier about what is the value of this niche qualification and what difference it can make versus not having this qualification. And I was very much encouraged by the words you shared with me. And I know we don't have time for that now, but I would very much like the other students to hear what you had to say to me, because for me, it made such a big difference.
Thank you, Sue. And yeah, your learner, you really took it to heart and tackled something that not many people would have had the courage to do. You helped that starfish. Is there anything that anyone else would like to? I don't want to encroach on Dr. Layla's time. Well, if that's it, I'm not sure if Dr. Layla's here yet or not. I'm sure she
Hi,
is.
Dr. Liz.